Dear skaters, today I am with James Svetec. He's someone quite known in the Airbnb world. He's the co-author of Airbnb for Dummies. He's an Airbnb expert, and he knows a lot about investing, short-term rental investing. On the investing side, he's even worked with the Rich Dad, Poor Dad author Richard Kawasaki. So he knows quite a few things at the convergence of Airbnb, investments, and what people like you can do maybe to replace the job with some cash flows from their investment. So without further ado, let's welcome James. James, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, thanks. And is it a fair introduction? Because I said you do, I think I've known you for some years here, on and off, and you've been pretty prominent in the Airbnb world, right? Can you maybe introduce you furthermore here?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I've been in the Airbnb space for about 6-7 years now. And I got started, my first kind of endeavor into Airbnb was property management. So I started managing other people's properties on Airbnb, just because at the time when I started several years ago, I didn't have the means to actually buy properties. So naturally, I started managing them for other people. And I worked with a lot of investors who I would manage their properties for them. And I noticed quite quickly that they were earning really good returns on their properties because they would often transition from long-term rental over to short-term rental to have us manage the properties. And I was very aware of what their property would bring in on long-term rent and what it was actually bringing in as a short-term rental. So that really kind of piqued my curiosity. And then over the years, I've trained a lot of people to run property management businesses. I've consulted it for a lot of different short-term rental hosts. Like you mentioned, worked with Robert Kiyosaki and co-authored Airbnb for Dummies there. And then, all the while just learning about the space, and then eventually finally, obviously getting into actually investing in properties. And so that's kind of one of my primary focuses now, is actually investing and purchasing these properties for short-term rental and identifying ones that make the most sense to purchase, specifically to use them as short-term rental properties.
And over the last 2 years, right after the pandemic started, actually, it's been a great time for short-term rentals. It may sound counterintuitive if you don't know the industry, but actually a lot of money has been pouring into the industry. Hotels were closed, but vacation rentals were open, for example. And even, we saw a lot of companies in the industry go public. Sonder, Home2Go. But even at the other end of investing, we've seen quite a few people, individuals, interested in investing into the market. So you know them pretty well. What are people looking for when they want to get started with short-term rental investing?
It really depends. It really depends on the area that a person is located in and kind of how familiar they are with the space. There's a lot of interest in a lot of different markets right now. Like there certainly is a lot. There are a lot of people that are starting to catch on to this whole Airbnb thing and wanting to get invested. Where I'm seeing people have the most success and where I am choosing to invest right now is in kind of more rural or cottagey markets that are outside of major kind of downtown core areas. Because what I'm seeing is that, like, especially with the there's a bunch of different factors, but like right now, those markets are really hot just because with the restrictions on international travel, there's been a lot of domestic tourism happening. So an area that's 2-3 hour drive outside of a major metropolitan area, that tends to do really well and have a lot of demand just in the kind of current era. But I think also longer term, those properties are a lot less expensive and can make disproportionately better returns. If you compare, investing in a downtown core where prices are obviously inflated because you're competing with people that want to buy as their primary residence. A lot of people in those downtown cores, you're competing with people that are buying as long-term rentals, where if you get out into the more rural areas, there just isn't as much competition. So the prices aren't as inflated, but those properties can still generate really high income as short-term rental properties. So I'm seeing a lot of demand and a lot of kind of interest in those more rural markets that are not really the first ones you think of. I think a lot of people, when they first think about short-term rentals, they think about like an LA, or they think about a San Diego or an Austin, Texas, or like parts of Florida. And there's markets like, for example, Gatlinburg, Tennessee, that a lot of people wouldn't have heard of, that's just exploding right now. And it's just, the returns there can be really massive.
Yeah, that's a very good insight indeed. Southeast of the U.S., like Tennessee or of course Florida, but all these the Carolinas, all these states have done really well during the pandemic. They're great places where to invest and get properties, because to your point, these are also traditional vacation rental markets. So they've been around for decades. So it's not like people will not go there after the pandemic is over, right? These are very good markets, and that's very interesting. And so people who are looking to get into these markets, again, what's the primary motivation for people who say, yes, I want to get started with short-term rentals? What do you have in mind? Do they want to build a business empire? Do you want to get cash? What's the idea here?
I think a lot of the reason that people are attracted to short-term rental investing specifically is because of the cash flow that it generates. So like a lot of the time, I like to compare it and contrast it with like, if you're going the opposite route, but investing wise, it'd be, long-term rental investing. And typically you'd be striving for multifamily residential. And that play, like if you're buying a block of 10, 15, 20 apartment buildings, the advantage there is appreciation. You can do the renovation work, and you can force the rents up, and then that is going to force that property to be worth a lot more, because properties like that sell on a multiple of how much they earn in rent and the net operating income of the property. So it's a lot, because the main driver of your returns there is appreciation. It takes a lot longer to get to that end goal, whatever your end goal is investing wise. And then it's also just not practical, because those properties don't cash flow incredibly well. It's not often practical to replace your income in short time with the cash flow from those properties. So it's more you're delaying the cash flows with that strategy for a future nest egg 20, 30 years down the road. Whereas with short-term rental investing, you're investing, like in most cases, you're going to be investing in single family homes. And so the appreciation on them, it's largely driven just by market influences, as opposed to being driven by the rent roll on the property. And so your appreciation is not going to be as within your control. It's not going to be massive. That's not really why we buy. Like ultimately, we do want to be able to hold on to this property and have it appreciate over 5, 10, 15 years and sell it at a profit if we decide to sell it. But the main driver of our returns with short-term rental investing is the cash flow. Like you can pick up a property for $500,000. And we just did this. We picked up a property about 7 months ago, and I actually just did a video on our YouTube channel breaking down the numbers on that property. In the first 6.5 months, that property has cash flowed $48,000. So that's, like if you annualize that, we're going to be looking at, we went through the high season as part of that. So we're not going to end up double that, but we're probably going to end up at about $70,000, $60,000, $70,000 in cash flow from that one property. That's a $500,000 property that, like, it's really feasible for a lot of people to buy that as their first or their second investment property. It doesn't take, decades to build up to buying that, the same way that it would take decades to build up to buying a 10 or 15 or 20 unit property for most people. So it's just very, very attainable. And the cash flow from that is like, that can actually replace your income. That's real cash. That's not appreciation that is locked into the property until you refinance or you sell. It's literal cash flow that is actually, going into your bank account, and you can use that to replace your income if that's what you choose to do with it. So I think that's the main drivers. People just want to be able to kind of like escape the 9-to-5, escape the rat race, and do it in a way where they don't have to go out and reinvent the wheel and start a business and take on all this risk. It's just a very attractive way to do it, is through short-term rental investing.
James, you've worked with quite a few short-term rental investors, and we've talked about, for example, one misconception, which is like, I should go after urban centers and not look at the rest. Can you name maybe one other misconception you've heard from people, investing for the first time in this market?
For sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of misconception around property analysis. And so I think that a lot of people think one of two things. They either think short-term rental investing is risky because it's so unpredictable how much the property is going to bring in. Or people are on the other side of that and they think, oh, I could just look at Airbnb and see what properties are doing, and then I'll just kind of like estimate, and that's how I should do it. In reality, it's kind of right in the middle. So both are very wrong. So the idea that short-term rental investing is risky and it's unpredictable, I think stems from the fact that it does fluctuate a lot. So, you're not getting the exact same rent amount every month the way you would with a long-term rental, but it is highly predictable. So those fluctuations are based on highly predictable seasonal patterns. And so it doesn't have to be risky. You can actually go and go to data sites like AirDNA and grab data for the property and run projections and know with relative certainty how well that property is going to perform. But then on the flip side of that, you can't just go to Airbnb itself and try to guesstimate at those numbers, because that does introduce a lot of margin for error. So you want to be going to sites like, I always recommend people go to AirDNA, and we've got different tools we use for analyzing properties, because it really can be, it doesn't have to be risky. You can be investing diligently and investing safely if you use the right tools and the right strategies.
And you just alluded to tools you're using and to things like that. So if people want, for example, to work with you, have access to these tools, what should they be doing?
Yeah, well, I think like the best thing they can do is to start with just going to bnbinnercircle.com. We've got a free training on the site there that kind of walks people through, like my investing partner and I, his name's Riley. We kind of walk through in that training, like our main kind of pillars for investing successfully in short-term rentals, the things that we've learned over the years you need to do in order to de-risk it, in order to maximize your returns on investment. So that initial training is totally free, and that's really a great place to get started. And then beyond that, they'll have an opportunity at the end of that training if they want to set up a call with us to talk about, how can they work with us more in depth. But I'd say that initial training is like a great place for anyone that's just looking to get started and looking to kind of get sort of a good foundation of things.
Cool. James, thank you so much for your time today, for talking about a few things in terms of short-term rental investment, and for letting us know about this free program. That's quite fantastic. Thanks again. Take care.